Hello and welcome to another episode of Ken's Training. Today's training is going to be on how to check the charge of an air conditioning unit, the refrigerant charge that is. And the way that we're going to do that is we're doing preventive maintenance on air conditioning units, okay? And I've got, let's see, a total of 8 units. 4 of them are packaged units and 4 of them are split systems. But I'm not necessarily going to put gauges, my HVAC gauges, on each one of these units. Generally what we'll do is we'll do the preventive maintenance. This particular PM is a semi-annual. So there'll be some grease and lubrication, checking the air filters, checking and adjusting the belts and things of this nature. And then we're also going to be doing temperature checks across the coils to see what the delta T or the temperature difference is to determine how efficient those coils are running. And if we determine that they're running pretty good without doing anything, what I mean by that is let's just say a minimum of a 10-degree Fahrenheit delta T across the coil, we may not even put gauges on that unit. And if we're getting something in the neighborhood of a 15 to 20 degree Fahrenheit delta T on a coil, then it's not necessary to put gauges on there unless you are suspecting something or the unit's acting weird and you just want to see what's going on. Every time you put gauges on, a little bit of refrigerant does escape out into the atmosphere. The refrigerant systems that I'll be dealing with are all R22. Which is an HCFC, so it does somewhat deplete the ozone layer. Not as quite as bad as a CFC refrigerant, but still, as an HCFC refrigerant, it still has some depleting properties to it, so we just want to limit that. So we only put gauges on if it's absolutely necessary or if we deem it to be necessary. But I'll put 1 gauge on each system. And when the units that are packaged, well, they have TXV expansion valves. So the way to check the charge with the TXV is the subcooling method, and the split system units that I have down in the basement, well, they have capillary tube for the metering device, and those will use the superheat method to determine whether we've got a good charge in there. But overall, we're going to look at the overall situation to see what it looks like. And I have an actual a sheet that I fill out in order so that I can document what the health of the unit is. And I've got that sheet right behind me here, and we're going to zoom in on that. We're going to show that to you. Now, what I do is I fill out the sheet and then I keep a record of them for my logs because I maintain so many pieces of equipment and I go back to these pieces of equipment every 6 months, every few years, every year. So then after a few years I've got a documented history. As an example, on my units that have the split system capillary tube, I've got all these sheets here that are all filled out from previous times, and each one of these is me putting gauges on and recording what the information says, so I can keep a log of exactly, and I can look for trends to see, okay, I'm adding refrigerant to this unit every 6 months, every year, every 2 years. Obviously something's going on, or you're not adding anything and then something comes up, you know that something new developed. So you can determine if you've got a trend that's consistently happening, or if you've got a new event or something of this nature. So it's always good. Plus, if you think the unit's doing something weird, you can look back at a previous log sheet information there to determine, okay, let's see what it did last time, so we can now look at how we have a comparison basis to go off of. So those are nice to build up when you're in the same environment. If you're looking at new equipment every single day, then obviously, you know, if you're a service tech out in the field and you're just going from one job out to the next, you're probably not going to do this. Now, as far as the sheet goes, if you would like to have a sheet, you can request one. Okay, so before I get into the sheet, let's just go over the basic refrigeration cycle. So this way you have a basis of what to look for. When we fill out the sheet, we're going to be in the field, and you got to know what components to look for in order to put your gauges and your temperature probes and so forth in the correct place. And you got to kind of know what it is that you're trying to achieve. So, because every unit looks slightly, different, or you just got to look at the piping in order to figure things out. But generally speaking, I've got the basic refrigeration cycle right here, right behind me. It's also on the sheet, but I'm just going to give you a brief explanation. I always like to start, when I talk about the basic refrigeration cycle, I always like to start at the compressor. The compressor is the heart of the machine. It is the lifeblood or the pump. Now, so let's talk about first the four main components, the names of them, and then what each component does individually. So the first item is the compressor. The compressor goes over to the condenser. The condenser comes over to the metering device, and then the refrigerant goes to the evaporator, and then it goes back to the compressor. These are the four main components in the basic refrigeration cycle. Every refrigeration cycle has these four main components, otherwise it's not a refrigeration cycle. Now let's talk about each component individually real briefly. The compressor. What does the compressor do? The compressor takes in low pressure, low vapor refrigerant, and it compresses it into a high pressure, high temperature vapor refrigerant. That high pressure, high temperature vapor refrigerant comes over to the condenser. The job of the condenser is to reject the heat of the refrigerant. Okay, now, so from the condenser, we're going to leave the condenser with a high pressure liquid refrigerant. This is going to be the liquid line traveling towards the metering device. If you're going to have a sight glass, it's going to be somewhere on this line, because that sight glass wants to show no bubbles, because you should be feeding 100% liquid refrigerant to your metering device. A metering device is a component of the system that is nothing more than a restriction. This is going to have some type of restriction in it, because you're going to go from a high pressure on this side to a low pressure on the other side. Your 100% liquid refrigerant, when it travels through that restriction, 25% of it will immediately flash off into a vapor. The remaining 75% will still be in a liquid format while it travels into the beginning stages of the evaporator coil. When it goes into the evaporator coil is going to boil off that refrigerant completely, change it all into a vapor, and then the last stage is, once it passes through the saturation point, which means that it goes from a partial liquid and vapor to 100% vapor, that's at saturation. Then as that vapor refrigerant continues to pick up heat, that's when it creates superheat. So that's when you're going to superheat the refrigerant slightly. And then from the evaporator, that refrigerant, which is now low pressure, low temperature vapor refrigerant, is now going to travel back into the compressor, where this repeats the cycle. So that's the main components of the basic refrigeration cycle. Now, what I want to do, again, this is all going back to checking the charge of an air conditioning unit. I'm going to fill out my AC checklist. Go ahead and put a zoom in so that you can see this right here fairly good. Now, you'll notice that I've got two different basic refrigeration cycles here on the same sheet. And then up here at the top, you'll notice this is for the refrigerant temperatures and pressures. And on the bottom section here, this is for air temperature and air temperatures, just the air temperatures. So it depends on what it is that you're trying to measure at that point in time, and this is where you put it. So the items that we do want to check on the refrigerant temperatures and pressures, the first item is the evaporator inlet temperature. So that's an actual temperature. When I want to know what the temperature of the refrigerant is when it leaves the the evaporator coil. That's the actual low temperature. When you have your HVAC gauges on, your low side pressure gauge is going to go here, and the corresponding temperature to the refrigerant will go right here. Oh, by the way, the reason why there's a line here is if you have two compressor systems. In the units that I have, which are packaged units, those units are a packaged unit and they have two compressors. In the split system units that I have downstairs, those are strictly one compressor units. So you would only need to fill in the column here on the left-hand side of that. And go ahead and zoom back in over here so we can go through the rest of this. Okay, so going through the refrigeration cycle just after the compressor, actually at the compressor, I'm going to do an amp clamp and figure out what the amp reading is for the compressor. I also want to look at the data nameplate to figure out what the rated full load amps are so I can see how stressed that compressor is. Now, let's see here. Going up here, if you have when you have your low pressure and your high pressure manifold gauges, your high pressure gauge pressure will go here, and the corresponding temperature goes here. The condenser inlet temperature of the refrigerant, I want to measure that out, and it should not exceed 225 degrees Fahrenheit. Because if you're exceeding that temperature, then generally speaking, you're boiling off that oil in the compressor, and it's simply, going to be too hot. So you want to watch and measure what that temperature is. Now, after the condenser, I want to know what the condenser outlet temperature is of that refrigerant, because my subcooling is going to take place right here. The calculation is built right into this cheat sheet. So what you have is you take number 1, which is the corresponding temperature, subtract number 2 temperature, the actual condenser outlet temperature, and it tells you what your degrees of subcooling is right there. Also, the superheat temperature is right here. The calculation is built right in. If I know what my actual low temperature is coming out of the evaporator, and I take the corresponding temperature according to my low pressure gauge, and you take the actual low subtracting the corresponding temperature, that gives you your superheat temperature. And then down here I have some notes just about, depending upon what the expansion valve is and so forth. I'll just go ahead and read that to you. If the expansion valve is a TXV, you're going to use the subcooling method. A TXV is a thermostatic expansion valve. The subcooling method to determine proper charge levels. If the subcooling is high, the charge is high. Normal levels are about 8 to 12 degrees of subcooling. For a fixed metering device such as a capillary tube, the superheat level is about 8 to 13 degrees Fahrenheit. Use the proper system charging chart for R22 and R410. I also have a charging chart, and we'll go over that as well. If the superheat is too low, there is too much charge, and if it is too high, there is not enough refrigerant. That's why there's too much superheat. If you need to adjust the stem for superheat, you drive the stem in to add refrigerant and reduce the superheat. Note, the TXV does not determine the low side pressure. The compressor and amount of refrigerant will do that. All right, now let's talk about the air temperatures. Now, the air temperatures you're going to get the evaporator in wet bulb temperature. So if you have a sling cyclometer, or I've got a digital one that tells me what the wet bulb temperature is coming into the evaporator, you'll write that temperature down here. That's the temperature of the air. The evaporator inlet temperature, so not the wet bulb, this will be a dry bulb temperature, you'll write that one in right there. The evaporator outlet temperature right there, and I've got numbers 5 and 6. You take 5 minus 6 and it tells you the delta T, and it tells you how efficient your evaporator coil is. There are bubbles in the sight glass. This is either a yes or a no indication, or NA, which is not applicable because your unit doesn't have a sight glass. Coming over to the condenser, you want to know what your condenser outlet air temperature is, the condenser inlet air temperature is. You're going to take 7 minus 8, give you your delta T, and it tells you the efficiency of your condenser coil. Now this is the blank sheet. Here's a system that is actually filled out, okay? Go ahead and zoom in right here. And you'll see that this particular one is UPS unit number 1. The date that we did the job was 2/13/14. So let's see, that was 6 months ago. Now, who did the job, which was right there. And there's only one compressor, so what we have here is basically a before and after. So before we did the job, these are the information that I wrote down. I had bubbles in the sight glass. My low side pressure was at 34 pounds. And I looked at all the information here, and I determined that what I needed to do was I needed to add refrigerant into the system. I also did a leak check on this one, and I found a leak on the sight glass. Actually did a whole video on this one here. If you want to look on YouTube, you can find this whole video on how I did that leak repair and charge. And the title of that one is called How to Find a Refrigerant Leak on an AC Unit and Fix and Charge R22. And that's at my YouTube channel, which is right here, which is Ken Training. So my YouTube channel name is called Ken Training. And again, if you wanted to go to my website, which is kencogliano.wix.com/Ken Training, you can send me an email if you want to get a copy of this checklist from my website. You can request one there. So after we we put the gauges on and determined that there was a leak, we did a leak check, charged the unit with R22, and then afterwards we filled out the section over here, which is like the after, and then you can see what all the readings are and how efficient everything is. Now, as an example, on the evaporator coil, before we started, I actually had a decent coil. I had a 15-degree split coming out of that coil, but when we were done, I had an 18-degree delta T on the evaporator coil. It really showed up though in the condenser on this particular unit. Before we found the leak and charged it, we only had a split of 8 degrees Fahrenheit on the condenser coil. After everything was done, we got a 17-degree split, which is an excellent efficiency going across that coil. And at the end of the job, we had no bubbles in the sight glass. We'll probably put gauges on this unit today so we can get a good comparison of where we stand on that unit today. So I just want to give you a little bit of classroom time, so this is a quiet environment. We are going to have to go and do it actually at the units, and we're going to run the compressor, so you're going to have that compressor buzzing in the background, and I can't avoid that. One other thing, on my package units that have 2 compressors, when I go to fill out my sheet, you see compressor 1, compressor 2, I am going to make sure that I'm only running 1 compressor at a time. I'm going to lock out that second compressor because I can't have 2 compressors running simultaneously because I won't be able to determine which circuit is giving me good temperatures and pressures and so forth. So I won't get accurate information. For me to be accurate, from when I do my system check, I can only do 1 compressor at a time, get all my pressures and temperatures, and then shut that compressor off, move the gauges over to the second unit, and then do the same thing over there, so I can get the health of each circuit. So when one package unit has multiple circuits, I classify each circuit as the health of that one refrigeration circuit individually to determine, okay, how's circuit 1, circuit 2, and if it's got 3 or more or whatever it has. That's how I'll do my determination. And so the next shot you'll see is us actually in the field. Okay, we are now in the data center. I've got a data air conditioning unit behind me. This is a called Daytech, and it's made by a company called the Airflow Company. This is no longer manufactured. This is CAC unit number 4. The last time I looked at this unit was 6 months ago, and actually everything was fine 6 months ago. In 2013, about a year ago, on compressor number 2, we added 3 pounds of R22 because this unit had a leak, and the leak was in a very difficult location, so we added a product called Stop Leak with the refrigerant, and then we added the 3 pounds, and we're just monitoring it since then. Now, inside here is the thermostat for this particular unit. This is the original thermostat that came with the unit here, but it's no longer functioning. So we bypassed this one, and we threw in our own internal 2-stage thermostat because there's 2 compressors here. Now, because there's 2 compressors, and I'm focusing strictly on stage number 2 at this point in time, what I did is I pulled out the lead to stage number 1 from the thermostat. So compressor 1, over here is your contactors. The one on the left is for compressor number 1. The one on the right is for compressor 2. The only one that's pulled in right now is compressor 2, so that I can monitor and see what the health of this unit is doing. So this is the internal component, the electrical components. I'm going to go ahead and shut this door for now. Now over here is your compressors. This is compressor 2 right here. Now, hopefully the camera can pick this up, but there's a sight glass right here. I haven't even put gauges on this unit yet, but I've been running compressor 2 for a couple of minutes. I got no bubbles in that sight glass. No bubbles in that sight glass, and the compressor is running without even putting gauges on the unit. This unit is looking like it has a full charge to it right now. Now, I have a thermometer over here. We're going to show that to you. Okay, this is a dual thermometer. The top one tells you that the room temperature, or the temperature right here at the thermometer, is 72.5 degrees. The bottom one tells you the supply temperature, because I got it right in the supply run where the air comes underneath the floor. And that temperature is 66.8. So let's just kind of round it out. Let's say it's 66.5. So all I'm getting here is a 6-degree split. Now 6-degree split is not a great split, but this is a very old unit. This particular unit's over 20 years old. That may be all this is capable of. Now if I'm getting 6 units out of that, 6 degrees out of that, if I did the same, put the top compressor on, I'd get 12 degree differential total. You know, that's not terrible. If you can get a 15 to 20 degree, that would be, you know, number 1. But this possibly may be the best that this one can do. Now, I do got the unit running right now, and there's the thermostatic expansion valve is right behind this cabinet door over here. It's an A-frame type of a coil, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to get you any pictures on that. What we'll do is we'll go ahead and put the manifold gauges on, we'll get the pressures, and I'll show you how to fill out the checklist for this particular unit for compressor 2. Okay, I just wanted to show you, this is the compressor, this here is the discharge line right here. This is the service valve right there, and I'm going to be putting my tap right there on that. So it's going to be hard to pick it up on the camera because we have this bar in its place in this unit. Now over here's the suction line. The suction line is larger in diameter than the discharge line. This here is where I got to put my tap. Now, here's my HVAC manifold gauges. I've got low pressure fittings, low loss fittings on there. But because of this pipe right here, I'm going to have to take off my low loss fitting and kind of bend that out of the way a little bit because it's such a tight fit. It's going to be very difficult for me to get on there, but I didn't build the unit. That's the way it is. So this is the suction service valve right there. Alright, so we're going to get ready to put these on right now. Alright, we're going to get on to the high side first. I'm wearing gloves and I have some safety glasses on for personal protection equipment. First thing I'll do here is I'm going to go ahead and take that cap and loosen that up. See if I can get it with this. If you can, you always want to use the smooth jaw rather than the serrated jaw, so it doesn't flatten out your hexes on your caps. So if you have a choice, you want to try to use the smooth jaw wrenches. All right, so that's that. Now when I'm ready, after I put that on, I'll use this service wrench. All right. First, I'm going to take my manifold gauges, make sure all my valves are hand-tight closed. I got no pressure inside of my eye side, so I'm going to have to give that a purge. I'm going to take it off from the low-loss fitting. Take the cap off back here. Screw that on the Schrader valve. Make sure that's good and tight. Now I got air inside of this line. So what I'm going to do, let me put this up here so you can see it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to have to loosen this while I back off. I have to back off this valve. Right now this valve is actually back-seated. So I have to, just come off the back seat a little bit. So I'm going to drive this in. So I'm going to loosen this up, drive it in, and then just purge a little bit out. That's it. That's all I needed to do. This is filled with R22 now, and my pressure is about 205 PSI. You can see that right there. Now I got to go over and do the low side. I got a little bit of pressure in there, so I'm going to purge that out this right here. Okay, now we want to get on to the low side, blue side of the service valve. First thing we're going to do, take this cap off. Take off the cap for the Schrader valve. And now I'm going to try to screw this on. gauges, and you can see the pressures that I'm at. So let me just mount this right here. So the low side is about 64 pounds, and the high side is 210. So we're going to go ahead and start filling out the sheet. All right, now for the tools that I'm going to use my field piece SC76 meter with the temperature adjustment, which goes in here. This is the thermocouple temperature attachment. Plus I have this one here that clamps onto pipes, and this one has the same attachment that goes in right here. So what I can do, since I know that I'm going to want some of these refrigerant temperatures, I can go ahead and put this on a pipe clamp right now to get it acclimated. So let's see. I know that I want the the compressor out, going towards the condenser. That's one of my refrigerant temperatures. This here is the compressor discharge. It comes up and it goes across to right here. So I'm going to just put that on there right now and let that sit for a moment. Now the first thing that I'll write down here is I'll write down the low side and the high side. So the low side gauge is 64 PSI. So I'll take this in under refrigerant temperatures and pressures. The low side is 64 PSI. I want the corresponding temperature. Now, I know the refrigerant is R22. When you're looking at the gauge, R22 is the one that's in green. You'll notice the scale where the needle is tells you that it's 37 degrees Fahrenheit is the corresponding temperature at that pressure. So that's the number you write down, 37. 37 goes right here, corresponding temperature. Now I'm going to do the same for the high side. The high side pressure is 210. The corresponding is 105. So that's what I'm going to write down, 210 and 105. They go over here. High side pressure, 210, corresponding 105. Now, I've got my temperature probe on the discharge line. So I take my field piece, put that in, put that on temperature right there, and that tells me the temperature of the discharge line after the compressor going towards the condenser. The refrigerant is 180 degrees Fahrenheit. That goes right here, 180. Oh, actually, this is all for compressor 2, and I started writing this in compressor 1. I should have kept it in sequence. What I'll do to make myself straight is I'll just write down compressor 2 so I don't get confused. So this is all compressor 2's readings. Okay, now I need to know the condenser outlet temperature, and I need to write that number down right here. When you follow your refrigerant flows, I'm going to follow the pipe, and the refrigerant goes into the condenser. This is a water-cooled condenser, but it goes in right there. So when it comes out this temperature. So you just have to follow your piping to figure that out. Now, let me put my gauges up here for now. I'm going to plug this back in. And there's your temperature right there. 106. It's close enough. So that's 106. That's the condenser outlet temperature. 106. Now if I want to know what the subcooling is, you take number 1, which is 105, and you subtract number 2, which is 106, and you get 1 degree Fahrenheit of subcooling. So that's how that works. Now, the next line down is the compressor amps and the rated full load amps. So first thing I want to do is write down the compressor rated full load amps. You get that from the data nameplate. Alright, the data nameplate is right behind this door. Here's the data nameplate for the unit right here. It tells you the model number, the serial number, and it gives you the electrical ratings. What I'm interested in is the compressor. I'm working on compressor number 2. The run load amps is 15.8 and the locked rotor amps is 91.1. The number I want to write down is 15.8. That's the full run load amps. So 15.8, you write that down right here. Rated full load amps. Now, I want to know the actual amps that the compressor is running. So I'm going to shut that, pop this up, I'm going to get my meter, and I'm going to come over here to compressor 2, and I'm going to get on these lines, and I'm going to write down that number. So what you do is take your meter, put it on amperage, which is that tab right there, and now I'm going to put the clamp around one wire at a time. I've got a hold button here so I can show it to you. Okay, so that one there is 11.8. So let me release that, and now we'll get the second leg. And that leg is 12.8. So I'll take the higher of the two. The third leg I can get up here. Hold on. .3. So 12.3 is pretty much the highest one out of all of them. So what you do is you write that down right here. Compressor amps 12.3. My rated full load amps is 15. The compressor is only pulling 12.3. This compressor is not stressed. Electrically, it is not stressed. So I'm going to go ahead and shut this. And I want to continue on with my temperatures. I'm going to stick with the refrigeration cycle. I already filled in this side. Now, I want to know what the evaporator inlet temperature is. Alright, now, to get the evaporator inlet temperature, you got to get it after the metering device. For compressor number 2, it comes down here, it goes through a solenoid valve, goes through the thermostatic expansion valve, it branches, and then it goes into the coil. The temperature I'm looking for is the temperature right after this thermostatic expansion valve. So I'm going to take my infrared gun and put that right on the coils there, figure out what that is. 44 degrees Fahrenheit. I'll try that again. At 45, so 44 is the number I'm going to put in there. So that number goes right here, the evaporator inlet temperature is 44. Now, if you didn't have one of those, if you didn't have this tool, another way that you could do it, but it's not as accurate, is to take a field piece, throw on your thermocouple, and then right here at the end, you want to touch that right to there, but you don't want to have your finger on it because you don't want the heat from your finger. So what I'm going to do, let me throw this right here. And I'm going to take a rag and I'm going to put it like this. And let's see what that drops to. 48 is one of the numbers that I saw. See if I can get a better grip here. This is just to give you a comparison. 47. So you can do it that way, but it's not quite as accurate as the way that you saw with this tool. So if you want to have one of these in your arsenal as well. So let me go ahead and put this door back on. Now, let's continue on. The actual low temperature. Let me show you how to get that. Alright, so here's the suction line right here. This particular one is all insulated with that cork tape. I don't want to mess with that. So I'm just going to zap this. I was getting 70, 75 degrees out of there. Let me check one other thing. What I'm going to try to do is put this underneath the insulation and I'm going to try to get a temperature that way. So let me throw this here. See what that temperature is. It's pretty close to 77 degrees. So okay, the other one was 76. So the actual low right here we're going to put is 77. To get the superheat, you take 3 and you subtract that by number 4. So it's actually 40 degrees. Now, that completely takes care of all the refrigerant temperatures and pressures. Now we're going to move over to air temperatures. Now, since I'm right here, I'm going to start with the condenser. But on my condenser, it's actually a water-cooled condenser. So I got to write down the water inlet and outlet temperatures. I'm going to try to use my pipe clamp. Now, on the condenser, I'm going to feel the 2 pipes here. And the one that's colder is the inlet, the one that's warmer is the outlet. So I'll start it at the outlet. you subtract it by 75, and that tells you how efficient your condenser is. So we're getting 14 degrees. Now let's move on to this side over here. The next thing we want to get is the evaporator inlet temperature. So that's the return temperature. Okay, to get the return temperature, the air goes down this way on the top. So I'm just going to take this and just get a number here to see what the air temperature is going in. Now, by the way, another thing that I did in this data center, because I wanted this unit to work, I took the other units and I raised the set points to force this unit to work harder. So that's why this temperature is actually a little warmer than normal. So right now this is about some numbers in the 80s, 79, 78. Over here I'm getting a higher number. I'm just going to call it 79. So the inlet temperature is going to be 79. The evaporator inlet temperature. Now, for the evaporator outlet temperature, that's going to be underneath the floor. Normally, I like to use the same meter for all my measurements because then it's the most accurate. But I don't want to crawl under the floor, and I already got a thermometer right here. So we're going to use that number over here. That supply temperature number right there, 68.4. I'm going to call it 68. That's the evaporator outlet. So in order to get the delta T, you take 5, which is 79, you subtract that by 68, and you get 11 degrees. So I'm getting a pretty decent split out of the evaporator. I'm getting a 14-degree split out of the condenser. Both of those are good. Now, are there bubbles in the sight glass? The sight glass is right here. There are 0 bubbles in the sight glass. So, bubbles in the sight glass, the answer is no. There are no bubbles in the sight glass. The only one that I did write down is the evaporator in wet bulb temperature. Now, looking at this data, this is telling me that I've got a reasonable degree split across the evaporator of 11 degrees. So that's like a green check mark saying that that's good. I'm getting a 14-degree split across the condenser. I'm going to give that a check mark. That's good. My compressor is running at 12.3 amps when I can go up to 15.8. That is good. My compressor is not stressed. The suction and discharge temperatures are good. My temperature of the refrigerant leaving the compressor is 180. It's not over 225, so that's good right there. All in all, the charge on this unit is good. So you come up. All right, so basically, that's how you put the gauges on the unit. That's how you fill in the checklist here to determine if you think that there's something wrong and you want to check the charge on your unit. This is the process that you go through. If I want to, I can go ahead and we're going to shut compressor number 2 off. We're going to turn compressor number 1 on. And we're going to check that to see what some temperatures are, and if needed, we will put manifold gauges on it to further diagnose if we think that there's a problem. If we don't think there's a problem because we're getting good numbers, we're just going to leave that alone. One other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my history and I'm going to look at CAC number 4 and see what the numbers were 6 months ago. All right, here we are. This was done on 2/19/14, CAC number 4. On compressor number 1, I was getting a delta T of 11 degrees Fahrenheit. That is exactly what I'm getting right now, 11 degrees. On the condenser, I was getting 13. Right now I'm getting 1 degree better. I'm getting 14. There were no bubbles in the sight glass then, and there's no bubbles in the sight glass now. So having the history sheet is extremely beneficial, because now I can use that as a cross-reference to say, okay, I got my numbers, let's see how well we did last time as well. And this circuit is very healthy. It sure looked like that stop leak material that I put in there worked really well. Let me show you where that leak was located and why a traditional repair would have been a little bit hard. Alright, so here's the unit, and here's the tubes of the coil, of the A-frame coil. The leak was actually, it's very difficult to see this, but it was actually way back on the other side over to there. And it would have just been days and days to repair that. Okay, so yeah, that leak would have just been a nightmare to repair with a traditional repair, because we couldn't gain access to it. We would have had to pull the refrigerant, pull the coil out of the unit, and then fix it, and then do some type of a makeshift piping arrangement so we could leak check it, put it back in, weld it all up, leak check it again, evacuate it, and then recharge it. It just would have been a huge amount of work. But we actually solved our problem with that leak stop material that we just added into the refrigerant, with the refrigerant, and that plugged it up, and this unit is doing fine, and this circuit is not leaking at this time, indicating that by our measurements and that there's no bubbles in the sight glass. So that's it for the packaged unit. Okay, I wanted to go over the findings in a classroom environment where we were not around the air conditioning unit. It's a lot quieter here. So let's we're going to zoom in on the checklist here, and we're going to go through what the results were. Now, mind you, compressor number 2, that was the circuit that I had originally. I had a leak in that circuit, and we added some leak stop and some extra refrigerant 6 months or a year ago or so in order to bring it up to charge. Now, in today's world, this is also a TXV unit. Now, right here on the cheat sheet, it tells you that if you've got a TXV, if the expansion valve is a TXV, you're going to use the subcooling method, which normal levels are about 8 to 12 degrees Fahrenheit of subcooling. But you'll notice that the subcooling level is only 1. And I am not concerned that that number is that low. I am not going to make a change in the system because of that very low subcooling number. And I'll tell you why. It's possible that it's just not, it could be slightly off by a few degrees. Plus, I'm looking at everything else to determine. Now, if the low number on the subcooling would tell you that you're low on charge, but my pressures are actually pretty good with a low side of 64 and a high side of 210. What else is telling me that my charge is pretty good? Well, I've got no bubbles in the sight glass. Since I've got no bubbles in the sight glass, that's telling me that I've got a full liquid head hitting that metering device, so that's telling me that I've got a pretty good charge right there. So rather than just take one individual thing, what you want to do is you want to kind of look at everything as a whole. I know that the compressor is not stressed, so that's not going to be an issue. I know I've got no bubbles in the sight glass. Pressures are somewhat within line, very normal pressures. I've got a pretty good delta T, going across the evaporator and across the condenser. So with all of that in mind, is there a reason to change the charge on this unit, even though the prevailing thing that you want to go by is the subcooling method on this unit? The answer is no. This necessarily doesn't need to have anything changed. Now, one other note that we could note here is that, well, the superheat level is pretty high. The superheat level is 40 degrees. And that's a pretty, it's a pretty high superheat level. But on this particular unit, in order for me to get that number, I had to do an actual low temperature. And that particular pipe, the insulation that was on that pipe was that cork type of an insulation. So I really don't think that number was 100% accurate. So because I don't think I really got a good actual low temperature, is going to skew off that superheat reading. I bet you that actual low temperature was a little bit softer. But considering that I had an 11 degree Fahrenheit split going across the evaporator coil, which is a pretty good split for this. This unit's 20 years old. So this is a pretty old unit. So considering all taking everything into consideration, I'm not going to make any charge adjustments. So I made a note down here: compressors 1 and 2 are good, meaning that refrigeration circuits 1 and 2, I just refer to them as compressor 1 and 2. Both circuits are good. So I'm not going to make any adjustments. Now let's talk about the second circuit, which is for compressor number 1. I've got compressor 1 column right here. Now, I did not put HVAC gauges on circuit number 1. That's why you'll see that a few of these boxes are not filled in. But the readings that I could take, I just took with my thermometer and stuff like that. I got the evaporator inlet temperature of 47 degrees, an actual low temperature of 73 degrees, evaporator inlet temperature of, now we're talking about, now this is refrigerant temperatures up here. Now let's see, 93 degrees is the condenser outlet temperature. After the compressor, before the condenser, it was 172 degrees, which is good. Now I took an amp reading on the compressor. The full load amps is 15.8 and I got 13.5. So I know the compressor is not stressed. Now let's look at the air temperatures. The evaporator inlet was 79 and the evaporator outlet temperature was 67. Mind you, this is just about the same as circuit number 1. Circuit number 2. It's almost identical numbers. I got a 12 degree split and no bubbles in the sight glass. On the condenser, I was getting 92 on the outlet, 78 on the inlet, and I got a 14 degree split, which is the identical split on the circuit number 2. So considering that there's no bubbles in the sight glass, I'm getting good delta T's here. My compressor is not stressed. Taking this all into an account, I did not even see a reason to put manifold gauges on the unit because everything is operating as it should be. So I didn't even take the steps necessary to put the gauges on there, write down those suction and discharge pressures, because I can tell that the system is already doing a good job. With all the information that was readily available to me without even putting gauges on, I can tell that the circuit is properly charged. Now, one other note, when you're trying to determine the charge levels, there's a couple things you got to take into consideration. Number one, you want to make sure that you're getting good airflow going across your evaporator. So you want to make sure that your air filters are clean or replaced recently or new. Your coil is not clogged up with debris or anything like that, so you're moving air nicely. If you have a belt-driven fan, you want to make sure that your belts have the proper tension so that the blower wheel is spinning at the proper speed intended by the manufacturer. I also, this was off camera, but I also put an amp probe on the blower motor to make sure it was pulling reasonable full load amps, which it was. So my airflow numbers were good, but you want to make sure that you look at that prior to determining a refrigerant charge. Another thing you want to look at, you don't want to do this in, let's say, a residential home in the middle of the winter, because you're going to be too skewed. You're not going to have enough load. You want to have load on that refrigeration system, on that air conditioning system in my case here. Now, I built up my own load because in my data center, which is where these units are located, these 4 packaged units, I've got 4 of them. I only run 2 at any one time. On the second one, the one that was running in tandem with the one that we were working on, I took this temperature set point and I raised it by 3 degrees Fahrenheit, putting that extra 3 degrees Fahrenheit of load on mine, and I even dropped my temperature set point down. So I created my own load by manipulating a second unit and dropping the temperature that way. And you have to have a certain amount of load on your unit, because if you don't have a reasonable load, you're certainly not going to get good delta T's. And that's one of the things you want to look at. So you want to do this. If you're going to look at charging an air conditioning system on a residential home as an example, the best time to do it is in the summer, when the sun is blazing hot down on the condenser, where your pressures are going to be the highest, and your house is, you know, pretty hot. Now, if the house is too hot, it may throw the numbers off a little bit that way too, until the house gets a little bit more in line. So there's that one aspect that you kind of want to keep in the back of your mind. But generally speaking, I get my best pressures and temperatures when I do it during the hottest part of the day with sun blazing and stuff like that. So I just wanted to go over that in a quiet environment. Okay, so now we are in the UPS room, and I'm going back to, this is a UPS AC unit number 1, which 6 months ago I had a leak on the sight glass. I'm going to do a leak check on that with my big blue. I'll show you that when I get to it. Now I've got 4 units in total in this room. These are all 4-ton split systems. The condensers are like 50 feet away, or 60 feet away from my current location. Now, I shut off 2 units, and the other unit, I raised the set point from 73 to 75. On this unit, I drove down the set point on the thermostat from 73 to 65 to force that one compressor to run very hard. So I've been doing this for 5 minutes, and I've got reasonable temperatures now. So we're going to start getting our information, so we can now fill out our AC checklist. Okay? So I write down the unit number, the date, and then the people that are doing the information. Now we come over here. And the first one that I'm going to get is this temperature right here. This temperature, that temperature right there is a refrigerant temperature, and it is after the evaporator. It is the actual low temperature. I'm going to put that number right here. That number is 64, but it's still dropping. I'm going to call it 63. there is too much charge. If it is high, there is not enough refrigerant. That number is a little on the high side, indicating to me that there's not enough refrigerant. And I do have some bubbles in the sight glass. Now, hold on, I'll refer to that in a second. Okay, I wanted to take you back to classroom environment. Obviously, it is much louder when I'm working around a condenser with the compressor running. Plus, it's dark, the lighting is not as good, and so forth. So now that we're in a classroom environment, let's go over the information that we derived. I've got my checklist, my AC checklist from today, right here. Now, 6 months ago, I have my AC checklist as well. Now, on 6 months ago, I have a before column. That was before I did anything. I got my initial readings, and then after I found that leak, I wrote it down. 2/14/14, found leak on liquid line sight glass, Titan glass, and no leak found now, and I added 6.8 pounds of R22. You're supposed to keep a refrigerant log so that you know exactly how much refrigerant you're putting in the unit, which I do. I keep a log of this stuff. Now, on the after side, after I put in this, I wrote down my readings. Now I can take those after readings and compare that to the readings that I got today. Now let's start with bubbles in the sight glass. When I was done after my charge, I had no bubbles in the sight glass. Today there are bubbles in the sight glass. Right there, that's kind of given me an initial feeling that, okay, I've lost some refrigerant. Now you saw on camera that I checked with my big blue right around the sight glass, which is where I was leaking last time. That is not my area that I'm leaking refrigerant. Now let's go over the rest of the numbers. Let's go with the compressor amperage. Today I got 6.9 amps. When I was done last time, I had 7.3 amps. So the compressor, the load on the compressor has slightly decreased. That's a second indication of a loss of refrigerant because the compressor is not quite as stressed. Now, an interesting thing about that is that if you look at the evaporator inlet, actually, let's go over to the condenser. The condenser inlet temperature is 111 degrees Fahrenheit. Let's go with the inlet. The inlet is 87. Last time the inlet was 84. So I'm actually 3 degrees Fahrenheit warmer on the condenser inlet. Now, usually with that warmer temperature, that would be representative of more load on the compressor. My compressor with a warmer temperature compared to 6 months ago is actually pulling less amps, further indicating that there's something going on with the refrigerant circuit. Okay, what else do we have to look at? Let's look at the all-important superheat number. This is a capillary tube metering device. The last time I did this, I got a superheat of 15 degrees. Now I'm getting a superheat of 35 degrees. That is much warmer, 20 degrees warmer than last time. A third indication that, okay, this system has less refrigerant in it than it did 6 months ago. What else can we look at? Interestingly enough, though, I'm still getting a great delta T going across my evap coil of 21 degrees. I consider that fantastic. Last time, I only got an 18 degree split going across my evap coil. So it's ironically running more efficient now than it was 6 months ago. My condenser is giving me a delta T of 24 degrees, which is a great delta T. And last time when I left this unit, it was only 17 degrees. So what I believe is this. I believe I've got a small leak in the unit. I've lost some refrigerant. The ironic thing is that right now the refrigerant loss is not so great that it is upsetting the unit. The unit is still actually operating great. It's giving me great delta T's across both my evap and condenser coils. But because I'm looking at these three indications that's telling me that I've got a leak, I am at this point in time going to shut this unit off. I'm going to take my halogen H10 and I'm going to go around and I'm going to sniff and see if I can't find a leak. And then hopefully I will find a leak. This is a pretty good split system. It's got a pretty good distance in between the two coils. I've got like a 60-foot run in between. But I'm going to start at the condenser, and then I'm going to work my way back towards the evap coil, and I'm going to see if I can't find anything. If I do find anything, I'll do my best to put that on camera. But that's it for now. Basically, the reason why I wanted to go through this entire video was to explain to you how to fill out an AC checklist and the things that I'm looking for. And I showed it to you on two separate units. The first unit, which was in the data center, was a packaged unit where everything was all packaged in one unit. It wasn't split, and obviously the second system was a split system. So that's it for now, and I'll see if I can't follow up with this. Hello and welcome back. All right, so the last time I left you, I wanted to do a leak check on this unit here, which is UPS unit number 1. I actually started over in the condensing section, took apart the panels, and I used my halogen H10, which is this leak detector right here. Halogen leak detector, and the type is H10A. So I just refer to it as a halogen H10. And the refrigerant that I'm working with is R22. So this goes on the right-hand side for R22. And then there's a sensitivity adjustment here. And I usually keep my adjustment like this, so that it's beeping like this. The camera might not be picking this up, but there's a speaker here, and it actually makes a ticking sound. But I got this UPS behind me, and so there's a lot of ambient noise here. You might not be able to hear it, so you got to go by this. Now, basically, what I was doing was just kind of going in here like this, and I'm waiting for this thing to light up, and I can hear it ticking. So then I came to this area here, and I just took my black Sharpie, and I just said, okay, I know I've got something going on in this area. So then what I did was, I took my can of Big Blue, which is this product right here, Big Blue leak detector solution. I got it set for spray, and I came down and I sprayed over here because I didn't know where the leak was at. Now, we'll reposition the camera and we'll show you the leak. Alright, there you go. There's the leak right there. Now, let me give it a spray here so I can show you. And you can see that bubbling right up there, so that you know that the leak is exactly right there, okay? Okay, now that we know where the leak is located, this is an aluminum coil. The date of manufacture on this is 1986. This puppy is not exactly brand new. It's pretty, it's pretty old. So what am I going to do about that? So aluminum is not the same as welding with copper. If you've seen some of my entire evaporator section, this whole thing. You could just do the coil, but because of the age, I probably would do the whole 9 yards. I wouldn't just do the coil. So basically, that's where I'm at right now, and the next shoot will be us adding this into the system. Okay, so what we've done is I removed my low side service port and I put on the can of Super Seal. I've purged this line right here, and I've got my piercing valve backseat, and I'm waiting for this compressor to start. Once this compressor starts up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pierce, there's a piercing seal in here, I'm going to pierce the seal and then back off on this to then allow the Super Seal, while the can is inverted, to be sucked in to this system, and it takes apparently about 5 minutes to do so. Once this Super Seal is in the system, all you do is run your system. We've dropped this thermostat down to 65 and raised the other ones up to 78. So this way, once this compressor comes on, it will stay on, which is what I want. I want this product to be circulated. It's got to find its way over to that evaporator coil, and it's got to find its way into that leak, and like a blood clot, it needs to build up in there and clot up when the other unit started up. Okay, so basically that's where we're at right now, and I'm just waiting for this unit to kick on, and we'll report to you when we have more information. Thank you. Okay, so we're back here in the classroom environment, and I have completely added the 1 can of Super Seal into the system, so that's completely added, and that's done. Now what I've done on my AC checklist here is I made a note. The unit that I'm working in is obviously called UPS number 1, and I put the date that I found the leak at 8/8/14, found refrigerant leak on the evap coil. 8/11/14, I add 1 can of Super Seal to the system. So now the next question I want to ask myself is do I want to put a little bit of refrigerant in the system at this time? Looking at my numbers, I know that my superheat level is a little on the warm side at 35. The last time I touched the system on 2/14/14, I did have a superheat of 15 degrees, which is a much more reasonable number with no bubbles in the sight glass. But because all I did was add 1 can of Super Seal to the system, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to leave the system alone. I'm going to run the system and run it hard. And the way there's 4 units in this UPS room. This is UPS number 1. I took the thermostat set point and I dropped this one to 72, and the other ones are either at 73 or in 74 degrees Fahrenheit. So this unit is definitely going to run more for the next 30 days than the other units. And what I'll do is I'll make a note of my calendar, and in 30 days I'll shut the unit down, and I'll check that evap coil where that leak is to see if I've sealed it up. If indeed I have sealed it up in 30 days, I'll go ahead and top off the unit, probably to the point where I just simply have no bubbles in the sight glass. Top it off, no bubbles in the sight glass, mark down my readings as the after readings, and then I'm done. And then we just monitor it in the following year and see what happens. So that's where we're at. Okay, so that's where we're at, and basically the whole reason why I wanted to create this video was because I wanted to go over the AC checklist and exactly how you fill in all the different things, how I make my notes down here if I find an anomaly on the system, and then I keep these for a further review for a future day. One thing real quick I wanted to mention is the cost of a can of Super Seal. This is $80 a can, at least that's what I paid for it, about $80. So it's not exactly inexpensive, but I mean if you're trying to seal your system, it's a good value. So anyways, I just wanted to mention that. I hope that you have enjoyed this video, and I hope that we have you click in some videos of the future. And that's it. I'll see you later.